Well, greetings, Mr. Colazar's Forensic Science classes. What we're going to look at today is the making of different prints that can be found at a crime scene for investigators to look for. So our first prints we're going to be looking at are going to be known as plastic prints, patent, and latent prints. So we're going to start with what are plastic prints. Plastic prints are going to be prints that are found in soft material. So in indentation, so like, if you were to use Carmex, when you actually touch the Carmex, it might be difficult to see, but we've got kind of an actual fingerprint left inside there. So anytime a soft material is touched, that can leave an indentation. That'd be an example of a patent or a plastic print. Good example here, we've got a big wad of silly putty. The silly putty, if you were to take and press in, we can actually see those fingerprints left behind. So like silly putty or wax or some material like that from the kitchen. I've got some butter. If you were to actually touch and lift back, you could actually see the fingerprints left in butter. So any soft material where an impression has been left behind is an example of what we're going to call a plastic print. The second type of print we're going to look into is going to be known as a patent print. A patent print is going to be a print that's been transferred by some kind of liquid, maybe a paint, blood, etc. I'm going to start out, I've got some Smucker's jelly. So if I had to take a little bit of jelly, and if you were to, say, touch that material and get a little bit of jelly on you, and then be able to actually touch somewhere else, we might get a visible print to show up from there. A better example though is if we had some kind of paint or maybe blood material and you were to take just a little bit and actually do like a little bit of finger painting, and as you're making your paint and everything like that, if you were to actually touch some sort of other material and transfer and to leave that paint or that print behind. So as we're working, our patent print is an example where you're actually transferring that print by some kind of liquid, whether it be grease or oil or blood or paint from that fingerprint. And so now I got to clean up real quick before we look at our last one. All right, so all cleaned up. So now back to our forensic science class, and what we're going to look at is our third type of fingerprinting. We've talked about plastic prints, we've talked about patent prints. Our third one is latent prints. Latent prints are going to be invisible prints, prints that are not seen right away. We will need to either dust for them or chemically fume for them. So we're going to focus on dusting for now, and we're going to look at ways to find those fingerprints. So first off, if we would come up onto the scene, we're going to need to have some prints left. So first thing I'm going to do is maybe just leave a couple prints so that we can hopefully find those prints. Now to do that, what we're going to be using today is some charcoal finely ground black powder for us. We can use many different things. We can use actual fingerprint brushes, we could use makeup brushes, both of them work very well, but our key is we do not want to over dust. Too much dust can leave us with a print that's not going to be able to be used. So we want to focus in on a little bit of the powder and then just to lightly brush on areas and hope as we're going to have a print start to appear on the page. Now as we start to get those prints to appear, we can add a little bit more dust to them, and as we add a little bit more dust to get those to become visible. Now the key is not to over dust. Now once we have them visible, there's going to be a couple of different ways we lift. For practice lifting, what we would do is we would just use regular Scotch tape. You would take a piece that's bigger than the fingerprint because you will actually leave a little bit of fingerprints on either side of the tape, and then we would lean over and we can go and we'll steal one of the prints and we can lift up, and then as an investigator we would lift it over and be able to place it on our paper there. So our lifting of our prints is our second part to that latent print. Now our latent prints, invisible prints, we have to dust in order to find. So one example was using black charcoal powder. It's very common to dust, and then we can even steal that second print that we put down, pressing down, pushing down a little bit onto there, allows us to lift that print. Before prints are usually lifted, the forensics examiner would actually take a picture of that fingerprint, just in cases we're noticing it didn't quite all the way come up from our lifting. So by taking that picture would be another way in order to keep that evidence. Now, if we look over onto this page, we have a problem here. If we were to use the same technique, and if we put some fingerprints down, we would notice that using that black charcoal would not be very effective in actually looking and finding those prints. So instead, we have a different chemical that we're actually going to be using. We are going to be using what is known as red Essent, a contrasting color. Now, red Essent is a very vibrant looking color. And instead, this time we've got a professional fiberglass brush. We may or may not need much dusting powder to actually hopefully get some of those prints to appear. Now, the only difference this time as we're working is we're going to use an official hinge lifter. Go, just put that back in. The official hinge lifter, similar idea. The difference with our official hinge lifter is that this time, when we find a print we want to use, we peel back. Ooh, that one's a little bit gross. And what we're going to do is take and select one of the prints that we like, and we're just going to press on top and lift and pull that print. And now we can see not only is the print secured in there, but our chain of custody information around the top. It's got the date, the inventory, the case number. That information would be all part of our chain of custody and allowing us to allow to use in the later on in that date, our later date in the law of court. So as we're working there, using a contrasting color to whatever you're working with dusting wise is going to be key. Now, our last example for latent prints, visible or not visible, need to be dusted for, is if we were just working on this paper. And so I'm just gonna, as I was saying, I'm gonna put some extra prints on here so that we've got some prints around, make sure we've got something to look at. And our last example is a very unusual brush. And the brush for today looks a little bit different. It's got this plunger at the top that if we take and pull back, moves back, but not much is happening right now. So what we have to do this time is actually create the bristles. To do that, we just need to lower it down, and when we lift up, what we notice is that this bristle that were made is actually made out of magnetic filings in that charcoal powder, and by lifting up the plunger, it moves that magnet away from that magnetic filings in the charcoal, cleaning it off. So we can actually make our own bristles. And when those bristles are made, we need to just gently and carefully wipe across the paper to actually get those prints to become visible. So as we're working, again, careful as we're going so not to overdust materials. Works really well on paper. On plastic bags is a good place for this to be used. This would not work well on metal, so depending on what type of fingerprint patterns and materials we're looking for dusting from would depend on what we'd like to look at. So just to kind of give a quick little recap of what we've looked at so far today, our first type of prints we looked at, plastic prints left in a soft material, indentation wise, so waxes, plastics. Our second type of prints we looked at, patent prints. Patent prints are left by some sort of liquid or paint or material, and they're directly transferred on something, so both of these types are visible. And our third type we looked at were not visible to begin with. Our most common type, we need to either dust or chemically fume for latent prints. Our next thing we're going to be doing is looking at how we can actually chemically view for latent prints. So again, nice work everybody, and safe travels.